Welcome to Human Talk, where I speak with the people shaping the future of technology. I'm your host, Liliana Muscarella. These conversations explore the human side of innovation, including values, visions, and the choices that define our digital world. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Dr. David Dow, a leading voice at the intersection of technology and environmental conservation. Through his groundbreaking work with GainForest, David is proving that AI and blockchain can be powerful tools in the fight to protect our planet and preserve biodiversity. Let's get started.
I'm David Dow. I'm the chief scientist of GainForest, and my background is in science and academia. I was a researcher at ETH Zurich, where I did my PhD in AI systems. And during that time, I fell in love with nature. And I wanted to make sure that the systems that I develop, the technology is also benefiting people at the front line of the climate and biodiversity crisis. And so during my PhD, I started exploring the idea of GainForest, which is a nonprofit in the decentralized science space that supports local and indigenous communities in gathering data around the world, especially biodiversity data. Biodiversity data is one of these things that is lacking a lot around the world, and it's also unequal. So most of the biodiversity data in the world is actually located in the global north. 85 and more percent is actually only in Europe and North America, while the rest of the data is only distributed in the global south. And for example, the Amazon has only 0.05% of all the data, which is ridiculously low in order to make informed decisions, especially on the AI side. So Gainforce has, over the last years, dedicated itself as an organization to fill this data gap, to tackle it through technology, but also to really leverage data as an opportunity for local communities to become more resilient, to join the data economy, to finance themselves, to become local scientists, that's what we call them, and also to just be more experienced and build up their internal capacities to develop technology, not just from top to bottom, but really grassroots technology. We call it localizing technology localism that really helps support kind of a more informed development and decision making when it comes to protecting nature and biodiversity. And we as an organization has done a lot in that area. We've done research, we participate in competitions, and our team is very dedicated in hopefully using that approach to kind of contribute in stopping deforestation over the next couple of years.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And how do you, I feel like in today's world, there's definitely this sort of almost, yeah, conflictive relationship between like tech and like AI specifically and climate change. So obviously, Gainforest is um, kind of having this, yeah, very unique approach that's hopefully combating a lot of this. But how do you kind of, when you're speaking to people who are maybe AI skeptics or like very, very hardline, like climate activists, do you feel like you encounter any sort of like resistance or is it quite well accepted? And how do you navigate that conversation?
Definitely not. And I think it's also an important discussion to have about the environmental footprint of AI models, for example, which a lot of great researchers are looking into it. Um, and I think the answer that I always want to give is that you need to be aware of the environmental footprint of any technology and any tools that you're using, and really consider if this is the right tool for your task. Let's say if your goal is to support if your goal is to predict where deforestation is happening, and that is in a very local setting, why would you run like something like a large language model or train huge computer clusters to do so? That would cost probably a lot of electricity when you can leverage local knowledge and kind of improve small models with local knowledge and have it much more energy efficient, right? Then the other argument can be done with, for example, when we worked with local communities in the Amazon rainforest. And one of the things is the rainforest is humongous and very large to monitor. So you need to understand where, when you have to be there. And so one of the things that communities do is they use gasoline on motorboats, and they actually burn a lot of gasoline just to patrol very important key sites in the river. So the use of AI models, let's say flying a drone, collecting images, predicting i- instant illegal deforestation, for example, and using that as an early warning system can reduce the need for petroleum and gasoline to basically patrol these sites. So there's this other argument to be made that AI can be used to improve environmental footprints instead of hurting it. But it is always a very nuanced approach that you have to consider when you deploy these models. I always vote for having these models really deployed with strong connection to and best with stewardship from local communities, because they usually know how to deploy these models, how to govern them, what is the right approach, because they live on these sites and they understand these problems better than anyone else. So this is something that I think is very important for conscious deployment of AI solutions.
Absolutely. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of your collaborations with different Indigenous communities. I know you've worked in the Amazon quite a bit, and it's
Mhm.
like you're saying, kind of how to incorporate this maybe traditional knowledge that is often kind of cast aside into these, super cutting edge technological approaches. And yeah, maybe just what you've learned from them, what those collaborations have looked like. And really, I think how all of that comes together into our kind of how we conceptualize like public goods or like Earth Commons, for example.
Mhm. I think the underlying layer is always trust. You cannot build anything together when there's a lack of trust. Trust is something that is really hard to build and very easy to lose. For example, we work with indigenous communities in the Amazon for many years now, and the way we established the initial trust bond is um, through trusted partners from their side that recommended us and opened the door. And then we invested a lot of energy and also a lot of resources to really come back. That's one of the things that is very important when you deploy technology. It cannot be a one-time thing. It has to be a relationship, and a relationship is usually starting with the fact that you promise to return, right? You promise to come back one more time, two more times, three more times. In our case, we come back almost every year. Um, actually multiple times a year. And so we worked with these communities around the world, usually with a local champion that helped us open helped bridge kind of using their social reputation, our initial contact with the communities. And then we commit on coming back and creating a long-term strategy and plan together how we deploy these technologies, what is the goal of it, how are we envisioning things. And so that's super important. There are so many cases where I can like tell you how communities have really improved our models. One easy case, for example, what we saw is initially our algorithms were detecting deforestation where people cut down trees and it just detected like a loss of forest. But if you only use, for example, satellite data and you don't understand really what's happening on the ground. A loss of forest is always a loss of forest, but it could be so many different things. It could be illegal clear cutting, but it could also be simply a wildfire. It could be natural death of the forest. It could be a natural agricultural cycle, right? If you're lacking this local knowledge, well, then you're misclassifying deforestation as potentially deforestation, but maybe it could have been just simply, yeah, it could have been a natural cycle of the region, right? And so you want to be really aware of the local setting. And that's where local community knowledge can come into play. Another one is we are recording data, for example, from the Amazon, and we really like to record bioacoustic data, sounds from the forest, where we hear the animals. But because there's so few labeled data around the world in these regions, basically every time you record anything in the data set space there, you don't know what the animals are. But of course, the local communities know, right? The local communities can hear, for example, that really loud, aggressive, almost sound in the rainforest, and you or me, I thought, for example, that would be like some kind of a predatory animal that's about to jump off and like eat me alive. but turns out to be just a little like howler monkey. And they know, of course, because they're living there. So this is also another really great example where you can leverage that knowledge from communities into it.
Mm,
And last, that is something really important that people don't consider too much is yes, communities contributions could help label data, but communities contribution could also help us design models really at a technical perspective that are more equal and equitable in many ways. For example, the way we currently develop machine learning models is very Western centric. So there's the Silicon Valley engineer that looks like any other Silicon Valley engineer, right? And they are developing these models always with their own perspective around the world. So a model can never be disconnected from the creator of the model and his or her vision of the world interpretation. So it's lacking a lot of stuff. For example, it can misclassify certain kind of um, subjects more likely. There's this really famous example back in the early days of image classification where a certain minorities are misclassified, uh, like face recognition algorithms are not able to detect them compared to like population um, like that are more represented in the data set, and that is simply a worldview issue, right? And if you have local communities that design these algorithms, obviously they are really aware that this algorithm cannot detect them, so they will try to prevent that and integrate more mechanisms to have these failure points addressed, right? Which frankly speaking, if someone who is not like uh, for- coming with a different skin color might not even notice that the algorithm misfunctions because he or she only tested on themselves, right? So this is really an important perspective where communities can contribute in if they're able to really contribute to the implementation of the algorithm.
incredible. Yeah, and how do you see, so we have, it's kind of this larger sort of almost fight to, um, rewrite historical marginalization, historical kind of exclusions with data, basically. So how do you see that sort of fight dovetailing perhaps with this fight to make tech in general, data collection, um, these natural ecosystems more of a regenerative force rather than kind of traditional extraction, whether it's data extraction or other sorts of like extraction from forests themselves?
Yeah, data as the commons is so important because I think data in many ways suffers from all the things that the commons suffer oftentimes. Um, Data justice is such a big topic. That is something that we're addressing, right? The majority of data that is, for example, just representing one worldview and all the algorithms are trained on that, and that improves the people who generate that data. That's just really unfair. To give you an example, um, how it's also connected to forests. One of our early projects with MIT was to classify the accuracy of satellite prediction algorithms on carbon assessments. And so a satellite picture you take, you can run a machine learning algorithm that gives you like a estimate of how much carbon is stored in the forest. And it works really, really well on all the benchmark data sets, right? But turns out these benchmark data sets, they all are kind of like boreal forests, like from North America and Europe. So once you test it out on mangroves in the Philippines, in the Malay archipelago, or like in Kenya, um, these algorithms fail and they have a much higher error rate than they have with European forests. What does that mean? That means that like European carbon-based projects, they don't have to pay or they don't have to rely on on-ground monitoring because they have these really fancy algorithms that can scale and can do the carbon monitoring really well. While projects from the global south cannot use them because they don't work for the areas, or even worse, they miscalculate all these carbon estimations on these areas and make things worse and less trustworthy, right? Is that fair? Definitely not. How can we? And the result is simply historical injustice. So the fact that countries from tropical areas oftentimes have a history of colonization and oftentimes got their resources extracted mean also that they have no resources to build infrastructure to collect data as fast as, for example, Great Britain has or the United States, right? And that has these collateral consequences that are especially prevalent now in the tech sector that we need to be aware of, we need to tackle, we need to consciously steer against. So I think this is a really important discussion to have.
Hmm. Hmm. And how do you, like you mentioned a partnership with MIT. I feel like kind of the
Mm.
world, and especially this world of kind of doing good, broadly speaking, but whether it's, international development, humanitarian assistance, particular like climate investment as another example, I feel like it's been quite shifting in the past few months. So how do you kind of establish that buy-in from yeah, something like MIT or these larger sorts of maybe funding or investment organizations, or is kind of as we're entering this new era, particularly in Web3, decentralized science, obviously there'll be less reliance on those sorts of entities. But how do you see them fitting into this progress, or maybe not fitting into this?
Yeah. So I mentioned briefly that before I joined decentralized science, I was for 10 years in academia. So I see academia and decentralized science both as complementary um, approaches to quite different approaches, but towards the same goal, which is knowledge creation and science. Um, I think the way to get buy-in from these institutions of traditional science and academia is to understand their language. This is not, this goes without saying also for the other way around, right? Like if you want to raise funds in Web3, you need to understand Web3's language. When you want to raise funds in Web2, you need to understand Web2's language. And it is very different. I think there need more there's a need for more bridging between those two in order for them to understand each other's perspectives and communication. And that's actually one of the things we are trying to do now in beginning of August this year. We are hosting a research retreat for Web3 and Web2 researchers on impact evaluation, hopefully showing each other's perspectives and hopefully making them understand there's benefits to each other's sides, right? Because right now, MIT looks at crypto more skeptically and like, oh, I'm very suspicious. Crypto is full of scams. While Web3 researchers look at traditional academia more like, oh, these are just like talkers. They don't have any real world experience. Not to say that Web3 people have real world experience, but they believe like they have an experimentation space that is different, right? So I think there's a lot to there's a lot of gap to be bridged. And the best way is to really deeply try to understand each other's perspectives and languages. Web2 people, for example, academia, for example, they care a lot about reputational system. They're very hard on ideas. They need them to be rigorous. Web3 air more so not so much. Web3 is more about execution. Oh yeah, whoever is the fastest executes an idea is kind of the winner in that space, even though there's impact evaluation missing and lacking. And I think those complementary approaches, they need to talk to each other. I do think there's a role for academia in that space. I do think there's a really important role to be played by these institutions, but I do also see that the future is more vertical institutions than horizontal institutions. So, because one of the problems of academia is, of course, the very strong gatekeeping that you can only access something like a fund at MIT. Like the way I got it is simply because I played that ladder and I ended up knowing people in this space. So we wrote a proposal together, and that's how we got the funding together, right? And then they took a large chunk of it because that's how institutions worked back then. But the benefit of decentralized science is more you just need to know one node and then you know all the nodes. So it's like a more vertical approach, which I really like. So I think both are very interesting. I'm spending kind of like most of my time in that traditional setting. Now I'm exploring that new setting, and there's so much to be learned about, but also so much to bring together.
Hmm. Definitely, I'm excited to see that as well going forward. I think more bridging is slowly but surely happening.
Yeah.
Um, and then you also touched on impact measurement, and I know that that's something that GainForest
Hmm.
is very strong on. So I was just curious how you think, or how you could explain kind of decentralized tools in general, like blockchain, could help make um, impact more apparent, hold people accountable while also remaining community driven. I think especially as we're There's a lot of projects kind of touting themselves as, tech for good or AI for good, but maybe there's not a whole lot,
Hmm.
and you touched on this a bit as well, not a whole lot kind of backing that up. So curious how you use that at GainForest and kind of your overall thoughts on that.
I really like the fact that, so for me, the blockchain space system or cryptocurrency is a really great equalizer. Like the internet was for knowledge, blockchain is a great equalizer for financial systems. Because if you look at the traditional setting now, traditional donation market, grassroots economics, grassroots projects actually cannot raise funds on their own. Oftentimes, they rely on a third party that kind of know the people, kind of transfers the funds. So if you donate, for example, money from Switzerland, you donate it to WWF Switzerland, and WWF Switzerland internally pays out its director $1 million and then distributes the rest of the funds somewhere else, right? Which is the problem of a middleman. And so I do not think the middleman should exist in in these settings. Because they take, I mean, they're gatekeeping, right? They like serving as that one node that benefits everything. But the real impact has to come and is still coming from the grassroots communities. So, in our perspective, what we care about is, can grassroots communities create their own bank account and receive the funding directly? And no other technology allows that except for blockchain. So blockchain, you have the benefit of sending money from A to B with minimal to no like time delay and transaction fees. So you allow micro donations, and you allow people who traditionally don't have any bank accounts because they're lacking papers and documentation to receive funding. And that's a huge game changer. And you also allow them to hold funding. For example, you allow them to hold ETH, you hold USDC, right? In accounts that are very safe, usually when they understand, of course, how they work. And that's also a big game changer because oftentimes people don't even have a savings account, right? They don't even have a bank account. So that simple act of being financially integrated into the system is a big game changer. Um, and that also allows for the second step for transparency, because you can see as a donor that really your money went to the communities and didn't went to GainForce, it didn't went to anyone else. When you look at, for example, the Octant funding now, where two of our communities contributed, or in GainForest, the Gitcoin round, where we hosted like a hypersearch round where donors donated to it, and the matching funds are getting distributed. Well, you can see that GameForce doesn't take any cut from that, because you can literally see the transaction that all the money went to the communities and their wallets. And I think that is something really beautiful. Um, while others, you need to read through their impact report, you need to trust the figures. Here in our space, you can just verify through technology. And I think this is completely misunderused yet.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of impact evaluation, I think this is a really great way where AI and blockchain-based technology can actually play together. You do need to rely on kind of algorithms that can process a lot of information. But then, for example, you can prove that something has happened, and that proof can be stored without tampering into the decentralized ledger, right? So, for example, someone collects a data point, which is an image. You can calculate the hash of the image, so you know that this is exactly the input image. You can calculate the output of the processing of the algorithm, and then you can calculate that hash. You can both store it together in the blockchain and link it to a transaction, and that's kind of proof of impact, what we call, lives in one space, which is really helpful for accounting and trust generation. And we create, for example, within Gainforce, these eco certs that does exactly that. They have one place, kind of an NFT that has a donation, how much funds, who contributed what is the data point, all linked in this one kind of object that donors can receive and transfer for, and that hopefully creates its own value contribution.
Absolutely. And I can see also that encouraging more donations, more interest, more sort of involvement in this movement in general. Once it's like you say, it's not just trusting a random report that was rushed out
Right.
the door, but actual trustworthy data. And I'm wondering, kind
Right.
of along the same lines, where do you see kind of, yeah, all this um, kind of never before possible data collection, um, and I guess more broadly, GainForce's sort of contribution towards the fight against climate change, whether it's has it been used, for example, in improving legislation or advocacy, or even like you were mentioning the photos that are being taken and how that I could imagine being used for in like journalistic senses as well. So yeah, I would love to hear a bit more about that from you.
Yeah, we have a lot of like stories that we collected over the years. GainForest exists now for as an idea for more than 7 years, and as an organization, we exist for a little bit more than almost 3 years actually.
Mm,
So in those years, we collected, we call it the stories that kind of motivate us to continue our path. Um, One is that because we talked about MIT, that's actually a very beautiful story. So MIT paid us this grant to collect data in the southern Philippines in Cagayan on mangroves to test out the algorithms on satellites, right? So that was the whole purpose of the data collection. So the communities collected more than 10,000 data points in this area, and then they collected it in 2022. um, each a picture with geotagged of a mangrove, and then we overlaid it with satellite images, and we saw that 2 years later that area became a certain part of this area became brown instead of green. So it turned from green to brown and brown and brown. And we knew exactly what's happening because someone's cutting down the area, right? And so we asked one of the community members to fly a drone and take a drone image. And you can see actually it was clear cutted, and there was even a bulldozer that was there in this area. And so turns out the local mayor has been cutting the trees to build like a parking lot. Um, and when the local NGO approached the mayor and said, "Hey, mayor, this is illegal because you're not allowed to cut any mangroves in the southern Philippines," the mayor was like denying the truth, saying, "No, no, no, the mangroves were already like this before, but because we have the side images and we have the recording from MIT in 2022, we could literally prove to a high instance um, that this is not the case. The mayor is lying, and now he has to replant the mangroves." This is um, this is a really great use case of data because data is basically fact checking statements and holding people accountable. Another way we use data is so we have this tool internally called Taina, which local communities use to report and talk to and share information. So there was this drought last year in the Amazon in October, it started, and the water went down incredibly fast. And the local communities were using this chat assistant to record videos, talk about it, talk about the fact that it's happening right now, much, much, much earlier than any news journal was reporting on the drought. And so we had all these informations ready, and we were able to actually start a fundraising campaign that raised roughly $8,000 to that like community that used the data to tell them about the drought. And that was really 2.5, 3 weeks before the first report from CNN came out about the drought. That's the power of having technology at your hands. So you don't have to come through middlemen, have them send and report. You literally can tell the story on the ground how it is. So I think this is what happens when you provide technology to the community.
that's an incredible story. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm wondering as well, like on the if we're looking kind of at the community side, and previously you were talking about having bank accounts and wallets, I presume. So would love to hear a little bit more about what that sort of uptake has been like in the communities, whether it's
Mm.
yeah, seeing the effects, like the CNN report, seeing it, way in advance and being able to prepare for that, or whether it's yeah, now they have maybe access to a bank account and can kind of interact with actually Web3 very generally speaking in a way that wasn't possible before, and that could actually contribute to um, greater data equity, data justice, and other benefits of kind of this decentralized movement.
Yeah, so I can like internally in our GainForest system, we work with 35 communities right now. These are the first ones were handpicked, so they come from our very strong network, and then the next ones were recommended by the first ones. So 35 communities right now, um, and we organize them into levels: level 0, level 1, level 2, and level 3. And level zero is communities that have so far no data infrastructure and they are starting to collect data. Level one is people who have collected quite a lot of data already and are able to fundraise from other sources. And level two is people who have collected so much data they can contribute to science. Level three is data that is so good that you can actually contribute a carbon credit, right? Like it's accepted by the market. Each of these levels allow communities to access a different pool of funding that grows over because level three is an enormous pool of funding, level two as well. Um, and so what we were able to see is by teaching and empowering communities with technology, with Web3, most of the communities still are in level zero, so they're starting to get used to the technology. But we have 7 communities that are in level one. They all raised funding independent of GainForest. And we have 2 communities that have raised more funding in some years than GainForest itself, but starting with us,
Mm,
right? And so this is just amazing to see how, and this is just a really hopeful path forward because we know that the other communities will also slowly level up. Um, um, and they are helping each other.
mm,
So level two communities, such as Bees and Trees from Uganda, started with zero knowledge about Web3. We taught him Satwa how to install a wallet, how to go create your first Gitcoin application, and now he is basically a star
mhm.
in the refi space, and he's giving back and teaching other communities how to support. I think this is the beauty of decentralization and the beauty of really not having one leader, because like in centralized spaces you have one leader, but in decentralized spaces you have many leaders, and that's what decentralization means, calls for many leaders. And so I think I'm very hopeful that this is something that actually can scale well. Gainforce is the maybe kind of the soil that makes this happen in the beginning. The plants will then nourish each other. That's how we see it.
Absolutely. Um, and yeah, I think you mentioned earlier as well, kind of this reluctance to accept, the crypto bro stereotype or kind of everyone in it just
Yeah.
for themselves. So you've spoken a little bit about it, but how do you see kind of, yeah, I guess the future? What does that look like as far as, using, there are many like amazing projects nowadays that are decentralized and using blockchain technologies. But how do you see the future of that, and how do you see, um, yeah, I guess this vision of kind of maybe getting back to the original ethos of blockchain, or maybe it's a new sort of vision that you might have. What do you think that might look like, or hope that might look like?
Yeah. So Sejal from Allo Capital and I, we just posted a proposal on the Ethereum research forum on this. Um, Basically, how can we fund Ethereum's public goods infrastructure forever? That's needed. And one of the things that we noticed working in this impact space, me initially in the refi space and DeSci space, but now more and more in impact evaluation, this that we see that a lot of the communities in Web3 are split up around different bubbles. We are not just one uh, opinion group. We are such a colorful palette of colors, especially within the Ethereum ecosystem, where Vitalik once mentioned that these L2s serve as a cultural extension of Ethereum itself. So Xelo being more refi, Arbitrum being more DeFi, Optimism being more governance, right? You have all these kind of bubbles of opinions, opinion groups with it, and they seem to disagree with each other. So I think the number one thing we need to do, and that's something we propose in the proposal, is something that Audrey Tang, the first digital minister of Taiwan, she framed it as broad listening, broadly listening to all these opinion groups and finding what we actually agree on each other instead of disagreeing on, right? Because in many ways, actually, there's so much more things that we agree on, and we just don't know it because we haven't really invested the time and the data collection into figuring that out. So that's phase number one, is a broad listening coverage of our Ethereum ecosystem, meaning we need to download all the data, talk to all the stakeholders, and use a data-driven way to figure out, okay, these are the things that we agree on. And once we have a list of things that we agree on, then we can, and we know where we have to work on, right? So then we can use some kind of a visualization, a dashboard to really showcase this is what we agree on, and this is what currently our space lacks, right? And then hopefully this is what we can fund together as a community. And hopefully that information, so phase one, broad listening, phase two, having a having a platform to showcase what we learned and have everyone understand the heartbeat of our ecosystem. Phase three would be to pledge towards all the same direction we all always want to go, right? We call it the Ethereum pledge, like pledging to all the L2s, dApps, and apps pledge a certain type of their treasury and funds to support into that direction that we all agree on we should move together, right? And that's the vision that I see, kind of a because we all gonna be very colorful. We're not having one vision, but that's okay. That's how society works, right? And so the way we govern is through a parliament where we have representation from different levels and different factions and political parties. And I see that Ethereum might be governed one day by a network parliament like this, that we have these kind of different perspectives, but all together trying to figure out and deliberate consensus and hopefully moving towards a way that we all can agree on.
Hmm. Hmm. And in this sort of maybe effort to, yeah, have this parliament have more representation, what would you say to someone, let's say like a climate activist or someone who wants to get involved in this, who has maybe no experience in Web3 or in collecting data, let's say, what would you say to them to as a way to maybe get involved and kind of push this forward?
I think the right way to get involved, especially as a climate activist, is to understand that Web3 is many, many bubbles, but then you have to get involved in the right bubble. Because if you, as a climate activist, get involved in the DeFi bubble, you will stop getting involved. or if you're, or if you're a DeFi person, you get involved in the region bubble, you might also maybe you get converted into a region person. Who knows? But it's really important for you to understand, first of all, on yourself, who are you, but then also understand that there is a space in Web3 for you, because Web3 actually has a space for everyone, but you need to know where it is. So you do need to do some research to figure out where it is. So specifically for climate activists, I highly recommend to check out the GainForest.earth website. Reach out to our team, because our team is dedicated towards onboarding. We call it the next nature billion into Web3 and support them in growing and learning about this technology and also spreading the message, because we need more diversity in that space. And I think there's other really great initiatives that help onboarding. Like if you're a woman in the space, Shifa is a really great program that supports. Kernel is a really great space for public goods that you can look into. And then once you get involved in that, um, one of the beautiful things about Web3 that I hear a lot of climate activists, so I had the fortune to convert some of my best friends who are climate activists into that space actually. They we all agree that change is much faster in this space than in the multilateral system of the United Nations, which is usually comes with a trade-off, right? It's more slow, but then it has its governance system figured out, while our system in Web3 has nothing figured out really, but that's why it changes really fast, and so you can implement your ideas really quickly. And both systems have its pros and cons, and we probably need to leverage and understand both to make really a good change here.
Wonderful. So I think I'm kind of my last question would just be if just to give you a chance to sort of showcase Gainforest, from day one until now, if there's any particular projects or moments, or maybe your proudest moment working on this project that you would want to showcase, and also maybe how it kind of connects with, uh, uh, as you know, we have this sort of um, covenant that we're working with human tech, and there's this one principle that's around um, you know, progress that damages the earth or the planet that we live in is actually not progress at the end of the day. So just anything along those lines that you'd love to showcase from GainForest, and we'd love to include that as well.
I think those are a little interconnected, but a little separate as well. So when we started as a young organization, one of the things we probably it's connected. We looked at Web3 and we realized one thing, which is people speak before they have data. And as again, coming from academia, this is a no-go because you're not gonna know what you're gonna do, right? You might damage the planet because you're sticking a mangrove stick into a and you're selling it as 10 cents per tree, for example. We see this, and you're claiming yourself to be like a world record holder of mangrove sticks, but then they all die, right? They all die, and that's is that something you want? Definitely not. But you're claiming wrong impact. And so one of the things that we as Gainforest never wanted to be is someone who talks before we have collected the right data sets. This is why we care so much. And this is why even after 3 years, we're still in data sets collection. But one of the things that is not just about data collection, it's also about benchmarking. So not only do we need to understand how good our algorithms are, but if we do impact evaluation and we tell other people what impact they have, we better put our money where our mouth is, and we evaluate ourselves. And one of the few craziest ideas Shafi and I had, my co-founder and I had, were, well, we applied to back then to the X Prize, which maybe some of you know. X Prize is a very prestigious competition um, on, for example, sending the first private rocket to the moon, or like solving like carbon sequestration. And there was a really big X Prize. It's a 5-year competition, $10 million on evaluating rainforest and nature. And we applied among 300 other teams on the X Prize because we believe in us getting assessed. Um, Last year, we won one of the prizes as one of 6 teams in the world. And that really proves, and this was definitely one of my proudest moments, is to kind of go from this crazy idea of we need to evaluate ourselves, pushing our team on our way, making friends and creating wonderful relationships with indigenous and local communities, and then together with our community stand at this kind of ceremony and receive this prize. And even Marina from the Mura people, she gave the victory speech for our team in the end. And I felt like, yes, this is a really great way of how Web3 can make impact, data driven, with proof of impact, and hopefully also then deploying what we have tested out in this competition to the scale of Web3 and to the scale of Web2. So yeah, I hope this makes sense, and I hope this resonates to some of our listeners.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That's incredible to hear, and I'm definitely going to be following Gainforce very closely, and everything that you're working on, and all the collaborations and bridging and kind of optimism that you guys are helping to build along with a lot of other projects in this space. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. It was really great to speak with you. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add. Feel free. We can also edit that
No, thank you so
in.
much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, and hope to be in touch very soon.